He saved an Apache girl from the jaws of wolves, and by dawn, her people would surround his cabin under a blood-red sky. The desert was bleeding gold and fire when Eli Carver heard the scream. A man trying to outrun his past doesn't stop for anything, but that sound tore through the silence like a prayer. He turned his horse, rifle ready, and found her. A young Apache woman cornered against the rocks, 3 wolves circling closer, hunger in their eyes. He fired. Once, twice. The canyon exploded with thunder. When the last wolf fell, she stood trembling, her long black hair tangled with feathers and blood. She didn't thank him, only stared, wary and proud, as though she couldn't decide if he was her savior or her next danger. That night, by the campfire, he cleaned her wound while she whispered through her pain, "You saved me. That means the spirits have chosen. You belong to me now." Eli almost laughed, but in her voice, there was no jest, only fate. By sunrise, the horizon would tremble with hoofbeats. Her tribe would come for her and surround the lonely man who dared to touch destiny. And the man who once rode to escape blood would soon find his soul cornered again. The sun had long died behind the western ridge, leaving the Arizona desert cloaked in a bruised violet haze. The wind moved like a whisper through the mesquite trees, carrying with it the smell of rain that would never come. Eli Carver's cabin stood alone on the edge of a dried-up creek bed, a crooked thing of wood and tin that creaked whenever the wind remembered it existed. It was the kind of place where a man could disappear, and maybe that's why he chose it. Inside, the firelight flickered across his scarred hands as he poured water into a tin cup. The girl, Ayanna, she had said her name, was sat wrapped in his old coat near the hearth. Her skin glowed bronze under the shifting light, her eyes sharp despite exhaustion. The silence between them was heavy, a fragile truce carved from fear and gratitude. Outside, the desert murmured coyotes calling, wind scraping against sand, and somewhere far off, the faint rhythm of drums. Eli paused. He knew that sound. It wasn't imagination. It was the steady heartbeat of riders moving through the dark. Ayanna's gaze flicked toward the window, her face hardening. "They've found me," she whispered. He looked at her, calm but cold. "And what'll they do when they find me?" Her eyes met his, steady as the desert night. "They'll surround this place until the spirits decide who belongs to who." The drums grew louder as the night deepened low, rhythmic, like the pulse of the earth itself. Eli Carver stood by the window, the barrel of his rifle catching the firelight, his jaw tight. Out in the dark, torches began to appear one by one, flickering shapes moving through the canyon brush. Ayanna watched them without blinking, her face unreadable, though her hands trembled slightly beneath his coat. "They won't shoot," she said softly. "Not yet. They wait for my father's word." Eli's voice was quiet but edged like steel. "Your father, the one leading them?" She nodded. "Chief Ten Crow." He let out a slow breath. The name carried weight even out here, a man feared and respected, a leader who'd seen too many broken promises. Eli remembered the war, remembered the fire and smoke when the army came to drive the tribes off their land. Maybe he'd seen that man once across a battlefield. Maybe he'd aimed his gun at him. He wasn't sure anymore. Outside, the hoofbeats stopped. The desert fell still. Ayanna rose slowly, walked toward the door, and placed her hand on it as if feeling the heartbeat of the land through the wood. "They think you stole me," she murmured. "If you go out there with your gun, they'll see an enemy. If you don't, they'll still come." Eli looked at her, at the firelight on her face, at the ghosts in her eyes. "So what do I do?" he asked. She turned to him, the answer heavy as fate. "You let me speak for you, or we both die before morning." The torches ringed the cabin like a halo of fire, swaying in the wind. Eli Carver stood by the window, watching the silhouettes close in painted faces, feathers catching the glow, eyes burning with fury and purpose. The air pulsed with the low chant of war drums. He'd been in sieges before, but this was different. These weren't soldiers. These were people defending blood, spirit, and something he could never claim to understand. Ayanna stepped outside first, her bare feet sinking into the cold sand. The torchlight painted her in golden shadow, her hair unbound, streaming like black silk in the wind. She lifted her hand in a gesture of peace, calling out in her native tongue, the words rolling soft but strong. a melody older than the desert itself. Eli could see shapes emerge 10, maybe 12 riders. At their head rode Chief 10 Crow, a broad-shouldered man with deep lines of sorrow carved into his face. His eyes, sharp as obsidian, locked onto Eli the moment he stepped out of the cabin behind her. The chant stopped. Silence fell heavy as stone. The chief spoke first. "You stand on Apache land, white man. You hold my daughter. Why?" Eli's voice came steady, though his heart thudded against his ribs. "She was hunted by wolves. I shot 'em off. That's all." A murmur rippled through the men. One raised a rifle. Another spat on the ground. 10 Crow's gaze didn't waver. "My scouts saw blood. They saw her wrapped in your coat." "What do you call that?" "She was freezing," Eli said simply. "Would you have me leave her to die?" Ayanna stepped closer to her father. "He speaks true," she said in Apache. "He saved me." The chief's expression hardened. "Then let him go, and the spirits will judge if he is pure." She shook her head. "He cannot. He is bound." That word again, bound. The murmurs grew into shouts. The warriors pointed their spears toward Eli, angry words flaring through the night. Eli's hand hovered near his holster, not yet ready to draw. He could almost feel the moment trembling between peace and blood. Then Ayanna spoke louder, her voice cutting through the storm. "By the law of my people, when one saves another from death, their spirits are joined until balance is restored. He belongs under my protection." The warriors fell silent. 10 Crow's eyes narrowed. "Protection?" "Yes," she said. "He is mine until the spirits release him." Eli turned toward her, disbelief flashing across his face. "What are you doing?" he whispered. "Saving you," she said softly. "The only way I can." The chief dismounted, every movement deliberate. He walked to Ayanna, placed his hands on her shoulders, and looked her in the eyes. "Do you understand what you say? To claim him is to bear his fate. If he is cursed, so are you." "I know," she whispered. 10 Crow turned to Eli. "Then hear me, stranger. You will ride with my people until the spirits decide your worth. Step wrong, and you die by my hand." Eli's jaw tightened. "Guess I don't have much of a choice." The chief's voice was cold as the wind. "No, you do not." The men lowered their weapons, but their eyes stayed on Eli. He holstered his revolver slowly, aware that one twitch could end everything. Ayanna walked past him, glancing up with something between sorrow and defiance. "Do not fight them," she whispered. "Not yet." They led him away from the cabin, through the moonlit desert, into the valley of fire, where the Apache kept their camps. The drums began again, slow, steady, marking each step deeper into a world he did not belong to. Inside the camp, the smell of smoke and sage thickened the air. Tents glowed faintly beneath the starlight. Children watched him from behind woven blankets, their eyes wide with suspicion. Warriors followed him close, their spears like shadows against his back. They tied his hands before the council fire, though he didn't resist. Ayanna stood beside him, speaking rapidly to her father and the elders. He couldn't understand the words, but her tone carried both plea and warning. The fire cracked, sending sparks into the night sky like tiny spirits fleeing to the heavens. Finally, 10 Crow raised a hand. The camp fell silent. He looked at Eli. "You wish to live among my people, you will prove yourself. You fight, you bleed, you show honor, or the desert will take your bones." Eli met his gaze without flinching. "Ain't looking to fight anyone, just want to keep breathing." 10 Crow's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, not quite a threat. "Then perhaps the spirits will find you worthy." He turned to his warriors. "Untie him. Let the trial begin at dawn." "No." They cut the ropes, and Eli flexed his wrists, the blood returning in slow warmth. Ayanna stepped close, her voice low. "I'll try to help you," she whispered. He studied her face, fierce, proud, beautiful, and terrified all at once. "Why?" She hesitated, her breath trembling. "Because the spirits chose wrong. But if I let them take you, my soul will never rest." Eli said nothing. The firelight danced across his face, carving him in shadow and flame. He wasn't sure what he feared more, the men around him or the look in her eyes. That night, he couldn't sleep. The drums kept time with his heartbeat. Somewhere outside the tent, Ayanna sat awake too, her gaze lost in the flames. She had defied her father, broken a law older than any written. Now both their lives hung on what would come with the sunrise. As dawn's first light crawled over the mountains, Eli rose to meet whatever waited. He had survived battles, hangings, and the desert's mercy. But this felt different, because for the first time in years, he wasn't fighting to live. He was fighting to deserve being saved. The morning sun rose like a blade, sharp, merciless, and without pity. The Apache camp stirred to life, dust glowing in the amber light. Warriors gathered in a circle, their painted faces hard as stone. In the center stood Eli Carver, stripped of his gun, his coat, and every piece of armor the world had given him. The desert wind tugged at his shirt, but he didn't move. He'd been judged before by men, by fate, by ghosts, but never by a people who believed the spirits themselves were watching. Ayanna stood beside her father, her chin lifted, though her heart felt like it might split in two. She had invoked the old law, a law meant to bind two souls, not save a condemned one. Now, as Ten Crow raised his staff, she understood the weight of what she had done. This man, the chief declared, his voice echoing through the canyon, spilled blood on sacred ground. He touched death, and death answered. The spirits will decide if he is worthy to walk free. Two warriors brought forward a young man, bound and furious, a rival from another clan. You fight him, Ten Crow said to Eli. Win, and you prove you carry courage. Lose, and your spirit feeds the dust. Eli's gaze flicked to Ayanna. You sure this is the way your spirits show mercy? She looked away, her throat tightening. It's the only way they listen. The fight began with no warning. The young warrior lunged, blade flashing. Eli ducked, the knife grazing his shoulder. The crowd roared. He stumbled back, sand flying, the sun in his eyes. He hadn't fought barehanded in years, and this boy moved like lightning. The second strike came quick, but Eli caught the warrior's wrist, twisted, and drove his fist into the man's jaw. The impact cracked through the air. Cheers erupted. Dust rose. Eli's blood mingled with the sand, his wound seeping, his breath ragged, but he kept moving. When the blade came again, he caught it between both hands, turned it, and slammed his opponent down hard. The knife landed in the dirt beside them. Silence fell. Eli stood over the fallen warrior, chest heaving. He could have ended it, could have taken the blade, could have proven himself through death. Instead, he kicked the weapon aside and stepped back. I'm done, he said. The warrior stared up, stunned, then looked toward Ten Crow. The chief's eyes burned with unreadable fire. He stepped forward, raising his voice. You show restraint, mercy, yet mercy has no place in battle. Eli met his gaze. Then maybe that's why the world keeps bleeding. The crowd murmured again, uncertain. The chief's hand tightened on his staff, but before he could speak, another voice rang out from the ridge above. Riders, from the north. The camp turned. Dust rose on the horizon, not Apache riders, but soldiers, cavalry, the same men who'd once burned Ayanna's village. Their banners glinted under the sun, rifles flashing like cold teeth. Panic rippled through the camp. Women grabbed children, warriors mounted their horses. Ten Crow barked orders, and in the chaos, Eli saw the insignia on one of the riders' coats, the same unit he'd once served under, the same men who'd turned him into what he was. Fate had come full circle. Bullets tore through the morning. Horses screamed. Smoke and dust swallowed the camp. Eli grabbed Ayanna and pulled her behind a wagon as shots tore through the air. You brought them here, one warrior shouted, pointing at Eli. The white man led them to us. Eli shook his head. No, I didn't. But it didn't matter. Fear speaks louder than truth. A warrior charged, knife raised, and Eli had no choice but to fight back. He twisted the man's wrist, shoved him aside, and fired a stray pistol taken from the ground. Ayanna screamed his name, trying to reach him. The battle raged like a storm breaking loose from the sky. Soldiers rode into the camp, shouting orders, cutting through the chaos. Ten Crow stood his ground, spear in hand, until a bullet struck his side. Ayanna's cry cut through the noise like thunder. She ran to him, fell to her knees, hands pressed to his wound. Eli turned, saw her, and for a moment the world froze. He could flee, the smoke would hide him, but he didn't. He ran toward her instead, dodging gunfire, cutting through the flames. When he reached her, 10 Crow was pale, blood seeping through his shirt. The old man looked up at Eli, breath shallow. "You," he rasped, "you bring death wherever you ride." "There." Eli met his gaze, voice rough. "Then let it take me, not her." The chief's hand tightened weakly on his arm, not with hate, but something else. Understanding, maybe even forgiveness. "Protect her," he whispered. "That is how you pay the debt." Then his hand fell away. Ayanna screamed a raw, broken sound that made the desert go still for a heartbeat. Eli lifted her, dragging her toward the canyon's edge as bullets whined past. The camp burned behind them. When they finally reached the ridge, they turned back. Smoke rose where her world had stood. She looked at him, face streaked with ash and tears, and whispered, "You should have let me die that night." Eli shook his head. "And leave you for the wolves again? Not a chance." Below them, soldiers searched the ruins. The Apache survivors fled into the hills. The sun burned low over the desert, red and vengeful. Ayanna looked once more toward her fallen father, then at the man beside her, the man who had just become both her curse and her salvation. She whispered, voice trembling, "Now you truly belong to me, because no one else will ever forgive you." Eli looked out at the burning valley, the flames reflected in his eyes. "Maybe that's fair," he said. "Maybe that's the price." "Well," and as the smoke rose, carrying the ashes of the old world into the heavens, the two of them disappeared into the wilderness, hunted by both sides, bound by a promise neither had chosen. The desert swallowed them whole. For 3 days and nights, Eli and Ayanna rode through canyons scorched by sun and silence, the ashes of her tribe still drifting in the wind behind them. His horse stumbled from exhaustion, her voice had gone hoarse from weeping. Each night, they found what little shade the rocks offered, and each morning, the world rose blood-red, as if even the sky mourned. When they finally stopped, it was by a dry riverbed where a few stubborn trees clung to life. Ayanna sat alone beneath one, her shawl torn, her hands raw from clutching reins. She didn't look at Eli when he approached, just stared out toward the endless horizon. "Your father," Eli said quietly. "He didn't die for nothing." She turned, eyes dark and hollow. "You think that comforts me?" He didn't answer. He just crouched beside the fire, feeding it with dry twigs. The flames flickered weakly, the same way he felt inside. "He wanted you safe," he said at last. "That's all any man like him ever wants." Her lips trembled. "Safe? I have no people now. No home. No name that isn't burned." Eli looked at her, his voice rough but steady. "Then we start over, you and me both." She studied him, tears glinting in the firelight. "You'd stay with me, even after what I've cost you?" He nodded once. "You didn't cost me a thing I wasn't ready to lose." The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was heavy with something neither dared to name. When she reached out, her fingers brushed the scar on his hand, tracing it as though reading his story through the skin. "You killed men like my father once," she whispered. "I know," he said, "and I'll carry that till the day the earth takes me." She nodded slowly. "Then we are both ghosts." He smiled faintly, a sad, crooked smile. "Maybe, but ghosts still ride, don't they?" That night, under a sky thick with stars, they buried her father's medicine staff, the only thing she'd carried from the camp in the river sand. She sang softly, words ancient and aching, while Eli stood watch, hat in hand. The song carried across the plains, rising and falling with the wind. When she finished, she turned to him. "The spirits say our paths are one now, but I don't know where they lead." "Nah." Eli looked toward the north, where the land stretched wild and untamed, wherever there's still room for a second chance. By dawn, they rode again, two silhouettes against a desert reborn in light. Behind them, the smoke had faded. Ahead, the plains opened wide, full of danger, promise, and the kind of peace that only comes to those who've lost everything. As the sun climbed higher, Ayanna glanced at him. "Do you ever think the spirits make mistakes?" Eli chuckled softly. "All the time, but sometimes, their mistakes turn out right." And with that, she smiled, not the proud, guarded smile of a warrior's daughter, but the quiet, fragile one of someone who'd finally stopped running. Together, they rode on a wounded cowboy and a broken daughter of the desert, leaving behind death, vengeance, and the ghosts of the past. Somewhere out there, under the same endless sky, they would learn what it meant not just to survive, but to live again. Weeks later, the wind over the mesas carried no drums, no screams, only the quiet hum of life returning. The rains finally came to the high desert, thin and silver, washing the blood from the stones. By then, Eli Carver and Ayanna Ten Crow had built a small shelter beside the river, where the cottonwoods whispered like old souls at peace. Eli mended fences, hunted what he could, and kept the fire burning each night. His hands, once made for war, learned patience again, and sometimes, when he caught her singing by the firelight, he'd almost forget the ghosts that followed him. Ayanna wore her father's pendant now, carved from obsidian, the black stone gleaming against her throat. She rarely spoke of the tribe, or of that morning when fire devoured her world. But when she looked at Eli, there was no hate left, only the strange, tender ache of something born from ruin. One evening, as the sky turned copper and rose, she asked, "When they find us, what will you do?" He smiled faintly, eyes on the horizon. "Same thing I've done my whole damn life. Keep riding." She shook her head, a sad smile curving her lips. "No, Eli, you'll stay. The spirits say your road ends here." He looked at her, then truly looked, and for once, the idea of staying didn't scare him. The silence between them was soft, like the wind over the prairie grass. That night, they sat side by side as the river shimmered with starlight. No vows, no promises. Just two souls, stitched together by fate and forgiveness, learning how to breathe again. And when the dawn came slow, red, and gentle, the land no longer felt cursed. The desert had taken so much, yet somehow given back something neither of them thought they deserved. Redemption. It didn't come with thunder or fire this time, just the steady heartbeat of two riders who had finally stopped running. If this story touched your heart, don't ride away just yet. Out here on the Western Trail, every tale carries a scar and a heartbeat that still dares to love. Hit subscribe to join us on the next ride across the frontier where redemption is earned and love is never easy. Leave a comment below, tell us what moment stayed with you the most. And if you believe in second chances, give this story a like so more travelers can find their way here.